I've seen some videos trying to utilize PRC tech. For one, using Future Arc with PRC. And this particular tech is definitely useful, but I see it to be very weak in comparison to what you can do with Kai and other departments of his prowess, right? Now, when you go for Future Arc into PRC,
And now,
you can go for Slash and Heavy Slash. And since the inertia of being pushed forward from the Future Arc while you're PRCing, you have your moments where you can just place yourself in a strong offensive, defensive state, so to speak. Where with the PRC, you slow down the enemy, so that's defensively in a state. So if they try to press buttons, you can't just block. But if, let's say, they were to attack a little later, you can go for your Slash and Heavy Slash and catch them off guard from right then and there. But there are some cons that I find with this tech, and that it's very weak in the center stage. And depending on the distance between how you're utilizing Future Arc with PRC, that's another thing. There's basically a sweet spot as to where you can actually go for PRC Future Arc to where you can make this tech useful. And where I am positioned right now, that seems to be the sweet spot, more so than less. So maybe a little closer can do you some good, but if you're a little too far away, it becomes meaningless to go for PRC into Future Arc, or Future Arc into PRC, I should say. Because as you're doing PRC from Future Arc, the most you can get out of this is a Heavy Slash. The Slash would miss, it will whiff, giving ample opportunity for your opponent to then attack you right after. And since you're far away, you can't really slow them down with the PRC time thing. So you're much better off utilizing a different tech that isn't as, I wouldn't say volatile is the word, but more like it's weak in certain departments of its particular type of tech. Now, like I stated, it's stronger in the corner, because it's more likely that the opponent might just like accidentally crouch and get counter hitted by a overhead, because since every air attack is an overhead, when the opponent is crouching, you can just do that instead. So by, let's say, doing this, you can go for whatever you want to go for right there and then. But doing it in the center stage is more likely that you're going to fail. Now, there's something that's a little bit of imperative, in my opinion, that if you're going for stuff like this, PRC from Future Arc, you're better off just utilizing your stronger suits, and that's basically placing the opponent into a shock state and using Future Arc by itself. Because as you're using Future Arc while the opponent is placed in a shock state, you can actually pull off, well, by pulling off I mean that you're in the advantage of just dealing with the opponent much better, so since you're in plus frames. But if, let's say, you were to use Future Arc by itself without shock state, it actually allows the opponent to attack you right back. If they're not pressured, that is. So that include, let's say, for example, okay, so I placed the opponent to block my hits. Wait, I don't think I did actually, did I? Okay, now I place the opponent at full block. So I'm gonna use Future Arc, and they're gonna, as they block my attack, the dummy, they're set to then attack me right back as soon as I hit the motor block. So I'm going to try and attack right after from Future Arc and see if it's still my turn.
saw that. Future Arc.
As you saw, I couldn't do anything. I tried 2Ping and I tried 2K'ing, though 2Ping is much faster than 2K. So yeah, it's completely not on my advantage. The opponent has the plus frames right there, they have the advantage to then attack me right after. The only moment that Future Arc, while not in a shock state, becomes at least somewhat useful if the opponent does not know the matchup is when you go for this.
Future Arc. Finger thrust. Saw that. Resound. Ride the lightning.
Positive bonus.
That is the only moment that you can actually have somewhat of an advantage, because even if you're negative on block, you're not very negative to the point where you can't do something about it. I would say it's like well, I don't know anything about frame data, but I would say that it's still somewhat neutral while you're using Future Arc without the shock state. So if you can go for DP since it's a reversal, or going for Super since it has a little bit of iframes during startup, you can basically catch up the opponent even if they know that it's not your turn. Now, the only difference that makes Future Arc strong, and why I'm even talking about shock state, is that when you're using Future Arc while the opponent is in shock state, and mind you, you should be placing your opponent at shock state at every given time. This is where Kai becomes much stronger. If you go for Future Arc while the opponent's in shock state, and you go, okay, implement the move, you'll think that maybe it's still not your turn since you know, it's Future Arc and it didn't work before, why would it work now? Well, it will. If you try going for 2K, which is much slower than 2P, it may clash. Or you might hit the opponent. So it all depends. So if the opponent is fast enough to input 2P, chances are you either clash with them or you will still hit them. Now it depends on timing. So you have to time your 2K in order to get the move to actually hit the target. That's what I want to say. But here's the issue that comes with Future Arc regardless of shock state. As I've shown you, that while the opponent is not in shock state and you go for Future Arc and they will try to press buttons on you, you can just go in DP right after, you can just go for Super right after and catch them off guard. But who's to say that they can't do the same thing back to you, both while in shock state and not in shock state? So if they're in shock state and you believe you're in plus frames while they're blocking, they can still catch you off guard.
Saw that. Saw that.
As you saw, there was a moment where the heavy DP actually managed to hit Soul, but that's because I was a little faster than the computer implementing the Volcanic Viper. But in that moment, the second time, that's when it was more at the same speed, same reaction, and Soul's Volcanic Viper ended up winning against my DP because it has extra hits. So that's one particular thing that the opposing player can do right after you. So you can say that this is both anti-Kai tech. So if you come across a Kai that ends up using shock state, implementing shock state to the opponent, and they were to try to go for Future Arc against you since they know it's plus frames right after, you can just DP. So if you do this to a Kai, they will be someone like mind-fucked at that point, and they'll think, okay, now what should I do now? I can't go for shock state into Future Arc because they're gonna end up beating me with DP. Well, again, you also have the same options. You can either go for DP or you can go for Super. If you have meter, you'll still beat them out anyways. But they can also play it safe and just, you know, not do anything. So it's still your turn right after, and it still beats their block, or their attempt to block, basically, because they won't be able to block the hit regardless. So their best bet is to either make a choice. Should I DP if I have a DP, or should I use meter to then go for YRC, or should I go for meter for Super and catch them right back? That is your only opportunity as the individual facing the Kai player. But if you're the Kai yourself, then you can do the exact same thing back to them. Now, like I think I mentioned this in the previous video, I'm not too sure, but while the opponent is in shock state, you can implement another particular special that gives you enough advantage to pick them right back up from. And that's basically DP. As it flings the enemy up in the air, you have enough time to pick them up right after. So you can do this while you're closer to the corner. And do stuff like that. Just from going for heavy DP. So as long as you're close enough to the corner and you do a heavy DP and they get caught, regardless if it's a counter hit or if it's just a regular hit, you can pick them right back up. The only DP that does not work for this, that basically sends them flying, is just the slash version. So you're better off just sticking to heavy DP, which is kind of stupid in my opinion. I see no real reason to use the slash version of DP other than the fact that it has better recovery rate. So if you're using the slash version of DP in a situation, then maybe you can survive if the opponent doesn't see what's the next thing that they can probably do against you, or maybe they're too pressured to press buttons. So that's the video basically. I wasn't going to explain too much of anything. I'm going to try to shorten this video a little bit so that way it doesn't get too long. And yeah, I hope you guys got something new.